So I'm just recording because this is a very, very brief recap of the PowerPoint that we did last week. And we've spent the last few minutes talking about this term here, jurisdiction, which again means, things under your control. And these are the levels of government, their areas of control, and then some of the things that are under their jurisdiction. This is, again, all explained quite in a cringy fashion in the posted video, Who Does What? But we are now going to add to this. There's not just levels of government, there are branches of government. So I'm actually going to now pause the recording. So we are talking about why we divide up the power between the levels and the branches. And I was just talking about how it does make things quicker and more efficient. It allows different areas to make decisions that suit their needs. And this is preferable because if we had one government that was making all decisions for all areas, sometimes there would be bad decisions that would be made. And a great example would be something like, well, let's say snow removal, which we do know is a municipal responsibility. But if it wasn't, let's just say the federal government, our nation's government, they decided how many snow plows each city would get. Well, they don't necessarily know the needs of every single city. So they might just give every single city in the country the same number of snow plows and be like, okay, here you go. Everybody gets 50 snow plows. And then, a city like Vancouver, for example, which, as you may remember from geography, is in a Pacific climate and hardly ever gets snow, they might look at that and be like, 50 snow plows? What are we going to do with 50 snow plows? We don't even get snow. What a waste. We don't even need snow plows. Whereas, a city like Toronto would be like, 50 snow plows? Are you kidding me? That's not enough. We're not going to have enough. So you can sort of see the value in allowing different areas to make decisions that suit their own needs. It's quicker, it's more efficient, it's more effective. That is the one of the primary reasons why we actually divide up the power. Well, there is, but what's the other important key reason that you were able to come up with in your breakout rooms for why we divide up the power? Why we don't let one level of government or one person have all of the power and authority?
Mr. Steinberg,
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, is all the slides we do that have information on NSP, like after we do them, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So the question still stands. We're trying to come up with the other reason why it is a good idea to divide up the power. Not just so that it's quicker. There's actually kind of a safety reason, quite frankly. Were you able to come up with that in your breakout rooms? Interested to hear your thoughts. This video is going to be really boring for anybody who is watching later with all this dead air time. I do find it hard to believe, put it in the chat if you need to. I find it hard to believe that with, and I've had the benefit of teaching you before, it's a very bright group of people, that with 40 plus students putting your minds together to sort of strategize and think, I'm sure that there have been a few ideas thrown around. Why not take the chance? Again, put it in the chat if you're nervous. Huh, nothing. Well, then here's what I'm going to do. Oh, maybe there is something here. So I see something posted in the chat, and it talks about the idea of protection. And yes, really at its core, that's what it's all about. Protection from the government. Now, I know you might say like, well, I thought Mr. Seidenberg, didn't you just say that, government is an important part of how we manage the country and how things get done? And didn't you say that we need to have a government? I did say that. And now you're like, well, then why would we need protection from the government? I don't understand. If it's a good thing, why would we need to be protected from it? Well, the short answer is that there's an old saying out there, which we talk about in civics and in history for that matter. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what that means is that if you give somebody too much power and too much control, eventually it will be abused. Eventually it will be taken advantage of. And so what we want to make sure that we do in our country is we want to make sure that we have a government in place that can get stuff done and make choices and make decisions. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we don't give too much power to the government so that it becomes authoritarian. We don't want it to become a dictatorship. We want to make sure that there are protections in place for the rights and freedoms that we enjoy as Canadians. And by dividing up the power, that is really the best way to make sure that you don't have one single person at the top just making decisions for everybody. And these are interesting times because I'm not going to lie, it can sometimes be convincing to have, a visible, strong leader. Because then you can say like, oh, this leader, they can get stuff done. That can sometimes be seen as desirable. The idea of somebody just being able to be strong and decisive and get out there and make decisions, that can be a desirable thing. But it's also very dangerous because sure, they might make a decision that you like every once in a while, but what if all of a sudden the leader who has absolute control starts taking away your rights? Starts saying, okay, there's a new boss in town and here's how we're going to do things, and then starts dismantling the system that we have with things like freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and telling you what you have to think and what you have to believe. And all of a sudden we're like, oh wait, no, I don't want that. I want to have protection. I want to be safe. But I don't want to be told what I have to think and what I have to feel. Otherwise I'm going to be punished. And again, we talked about earlier in the class, this is why a constitution is so incredibly important in order to protect the rights and freedoms that we have as Canadians. Because we want to have enough government to get stuff done, but not too much government that will kill us. You could use a medical example if you like. You could look at things like medication, right? Especially if that's why they say always read and follow the label. If you have a certain ailment, the right amount of medication could actually be very helpful to you. But too much of a particular medication, or vitamin for that matter, could actually have incredibly dangerous side effects and could eventually kill you. They even talk about, stuff like, again, I don't want to get too much into stuff like vitamins and everything. But, something like iron is important, for your development. And you want to make sure, I remember Flintstones vitamins. I don't know if anybody here, Flintstones vitamins, those are amazing, growing up. Where's it going with this? Vitamins and minerals and medication can be a good thing in certain circumstances. But again, too much of a certain thing consumed can be detrimental to your health. I know that the attitude might be, well, more is better, right? I mean, if one Flintstone vitamin is good for me, I bet if I had a whole bottle that, I'd be super healthy. You'd actually find that no, the opposite would be true. And you'd probably have to be sent, to the emergency room because you may have ingested too much of a particular vitamin, mineral, or drug that would actually do your body a lot of harm. And that's actually why we have things like child-proof caps on a lot of sort of medications and whatnot to prevent the overuse of certain types of, vitamins, minerals, drugs, etc. I guess you could make the connection to government. The right amount is good. What is the right amount is actually very much a topic of discussion, and we're going to continue to have that. So I am screen sharing right now, and what you should see in front of you is it says Canada's branches of government. We're actually going to add to the federalism tree. The trunk of the tree were the levels of government. We're now going to add what we call the branches. So there are all sorts of reasons why government makes decisions. Here are some of them. Sometimes they make promises. Sometimes there are, they will have the people that have elected them that have said, we have very serious concerns. For example, I'm going to try to get public opinion to sway in Burlington. Maybe I can have a campfire and have a fire pit in my backyard. Who knows? We'll have to see. But I can't just decide that I want to do that. I have to see if I can go to my town council and see if they'll make some changes. Who knows? These are what we call the branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. They all have different roles and responsibilities. I think I can't really stop the screen share now because I am recording. Oh, that's okay. We'll move on. But what I am going to draw for you, I'm going to do a bit of a picture that puts the levels and branches together. And what you have to understand that, for example, the federal government has an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And so does the provincial government, and really so does the municipal government. So these are kind of like subheadings, if you think about it. And what we're going to talk about right now is what these different branches of government are responsible for. This picture looks really confusing, so don't worry about it too much, because you sort of see the flow chart and you're like, oh my goodness, what does this mean exactly? We are going to talk about it. We're going to explain it, but I don't like this slide. So right now we will start off by talking about what's called the executive branch of government and some of the people who are involved. By the way, I am not using names right now. I'm talking about roles. I don't want to confuse you with a bunch of names. We'll get to names eventually, but names are actually a lot less important because names will change over time. We have had many different governor generals, many different prime ministers, many different elected members of parliament and cabinet ministers. So the actual names of the people do not matter all that much. What they do is actually most important. Now, this list right here, the executive branch, really their role, and we have it seen right here in the PowerPoint, they come up with kind of the ideas and plan for what they want to happen in a country. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's kind of like the captain of the ship, so to speak. They come up with the plan of here's where we want to go. This is the direction that we want to sail the ship. Now, they don't actually have absolute power. Their power is limited by the Constitution that says what they can do and what they can't do, but they do have a really important responsibility. They're kind of the ideas people, if you think about it. So the prime minister and cabinet ministers, they will, in many cases, sit around and strategize and come up with a plan that says, okay, what are things that we can do to make Canada better, to make Canada healthier, more prosperous? And they actually take these ideas and they go and talk to the next branch, which is the legislative branch. The legislative branch, oh, I see that there's a little bit of some overlap here in the PowerPoint. Don't worry about it. The word legislate or legislation is actually a fancy term for laws and lawmaking. The legislative branch, no new laws get made or created, no budgets get passed unless the House of Commons and the elected representatives there decide, okay, we think this is a good idea. So really what winds up happening is that, I'm going back a slide, the ideas people over here, the executive branch, where do they go? They go over here to the House of Commons and they say, hey, here are some ideas that we have that we think would be good for Canada. And then all the people in this room, all of the elected representatives, or members of parliament as we call them, they basically have to debate and discuss whether or not they think it's a good idea. And if enough of them think that it's a good idea and they vote it through, well, then it will happen. And so this kind of goes back to, when we talked about how does a democracy function, we said Canada is not a direct democracy. Individual Canadians do not vote on laws, but we do elect people to vote on things on our behalf. And this is where this all sort of comes into play. Okay, so the legislative branch, they have the power to debate and make laws, and the ideas that they vote on are the ones that were come up with by the executive branch. So, hey, I have an idea, let's do it. Then they go over here and they talk about it, they discuss it, and then we see if it's going to happen. Now, this next branch, I'll skip this slide for the time being. This next branch is one that we don't actually talk about too much in grade 10 civics. We definitely talk about this one a lot more in grade 11 law. It's sort of seen as, sometimes it can be confusing. Well, what is the role of the judicial branch? What is it that they do? And really, this is kind of where the Constitution comes into play again. The role of the judicial branch is to make sure that the government does the things that it is supposed to. So let's just say that they were trying to come up with a new law. If the new law was what we would call unconstitutional, meaning it did not fit in line with the rights and freedoms that Canadians have, well, then the Supreme Court would be there to look it over and interpret it and say, listen, no, we can't do this. And again, I think I gave the example in our last class and said, I'll go back 2 or 3 slides. If in the executive branch, let's say the Prime Minister and his cabinet, they came up with an idea for a law and the Prime Minister said, hey, it's my birthday. I want Canadians to wear a party hat on my birthday. And they take that idea to the legislative branch and say, hey, let's vote on this new party hat law. And all the members of parliament and the Senate, they said, okay, sure, sounds good, let's do it. Well, this is where then the judicial branch would come in. And they would look at that party hat law and they would say, you know what, this law can't exist. This law cannot exist because in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and in the Canadian Constitution, it says that Canadians have the right to freedom of expression. And it's not actually the government's job to tell Canadians that they have to wear certain hats on certain days. I mean, if they want to, they can, but the government can't force Canadian citizens to wear a party hat on the Prime Minister's birthday. That law would be unconstitutional. So they're kind of in a little bit like referees, if you think about it. They interpret it to make sure that what's happening is actually in line with how we do things in Canada. So there's a term called checks and balances. Oh dear. And I'm going to revisit that for you shortly. And I'm looking at the time that we have left. I want to make sure that I give us, we have plenty of time. We're doing well. The relationship between the branches. When we started this PowerPoint, we talked about the importance of dividing up the power between the levels so that nobody has too much power. That's why we have the branches as well. We want to make sure that no branch is too powerful. Okay, the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, they all have important roles to play, but they all kind of act as a check on one another. Kind of like a 3-legged stool, if you think about it. If one starts getting too powerful, well, then the other 2 can kind of team up and be like, whoa, okay, not so fast, not so fast. So That's actually where the term checks and balances comes into play. That gets thrown around a lot in civics, and I have a couple of PowerPoints that I am going to be sharing with you that help explain that in a little bit more detail. But this is, if you'll excuse me, this is the, if we look at the connection between the levels and the branches, this is what they are responsible for. I wish I was able to write on the board more, but I'll promise you this. We are going to meet again. Today is, of course, day 2. It's, again, kind of an interesting week. And then we're going to have day 3 and day 4. We're going to see each other again on, what day is it? It's Monday? It's Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, so we will see each other again on Thursday. Am I right? That sounds right. Okay. Where we will be revisiting this, and I also have a packet that I will be giving to you that we're going to work through together in person to help explain this a little bit more and make sense of some of the key players. I realize that this is, again, the first time you're hearing about like this. It can seem like a lot of gobbledygook, so to speak. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to stop the sharing and I'm going to post a video and we're going to watch it together. And I'm going to take some time to talk about it. I'll stop the recording for the time being. Let's do that. I'll pause the recording at least.